The splash came like fire in the air, a sudden arc of steaming coffee flying across a bright café and crashing into a young waitress's face, freezing time in one cruel, unforgettable moment. The sound of the cup hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot through the sunny, glass-filled room, and for a heartbeat, no one breathed. In that moment, a man in a designer suit stood frozen, his jaw tight with rage and pride, unaware that 10 men sitting quietly in the corner had just turned their eyes toward him. Men whose lives had been carved by loyalty, hardship, and a code that had nothing to do with money. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and hidden strength, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Light of Kindness, because stories like this remind us that real power is never found in cruelty. Her name was Mara Collins, and she had started that morning like she started every day, tying her hair into a simple bun with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion. The sun had already risen, pouring warm, honest light through the narrow streets of the small city as she walked to the Blue Harbor Café, the only place that gave her a chance when she had no experience, no fancy education, and no safety net. Mara carried more than just a tray every day. She carried the weight of her mother's hospital bills, the silence of a tiny apartment waiting for her at night, and the quiet fear that she might never escape the cycle of bills and borrowed hope. Yet that morning, like every other morning, she walked in with a soft smile, wiped the counters, and promised herself she would survive one more day. The millionaire who walked in around noon was named Gregory Halstead. He was the kind of man whose watch cost more than most people's cars, whose sunglasses stayed on even indoors, and whose voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had spent years commanding rooms. He sat by the window where the sunlight wrapped around him, ordered a premium coffee without looking up, and tapped his fingers impatiently against the table. Mara noticed him immediately because he looked like a storm in a room of soft daylight, but she still approached with the same gentle tone she used for every customer. She served him carefully, the cafe buzzing with the sound of spoons, quiet conversations, and the faint music of late-morning calm. That night, Gregory sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by glass walls, city lights, and a silence so thick it felt suffocating. He couldn't stop seeing Mara's face, not the moment of impact, but the way she stood afterward, refusing to break. He thought about the men in the corner, the way they had looked at him not with fear but with disappointment, and strangely with patience. For the first time in his life he realized that money had insulated him from learning something essential, what it meant to be human. The next afternoon, in full daylight again, with the sun bright and honest, Gregory walked back into the Blue Harbor Café. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses. He wasn't carrying that sharp edge. He felt exposed, but he also felt real for the first time in years. The café was quieter, the air softer. Mara was at the far end, wiping a table. He waited. He didn't demand service. He didn't rush her. When she finally came near, he stood up slowly, lowered himself to her level, and apologized with a voice that shook. Not a performance apology, a broken one, a human one. Mara didn't forgive him instantly in her heart. Real forgiveness doesn't work like that, but she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, understanding. She nodded gently, not as a servant, but as an equal. From that day forward, something began to change. Gregory started visiting the cafe often, sitting quietly, tipping fairly, learning names. He set up a scholarship through his company for hospitality workers who wanted to study. He paid for Mara's mother's medical treatment without ever putting his name on it. He didn't do these things for show. He did them because he could no longer live with the version of himself that had thrown that cup. Mara's life slowly changed too. She didn't become rich overnight. She didn't escape struggle in a flash. But she found a new strength. She began taking evening classes. She started believing that she deserved more than survival, Every time she felt small, she remembered the silent support in that sunlit cafe, the nod from a stranger who had seen her as strong when she couldn't see it herself. Years passed. The Blue Harbor Cafe grew famous, not because of scandal, but because of kindness. People came to sit under the daylight and feel safe. Mason and his men still visited sometimes, always respectful, always quiet, always protective of that space in a way no one asked them to be. They never told their story, they never had to. Near the end of this story, if it touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, please take a moment to like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps stories of kindness reach more people who need them. And before we close, special request, comment what part of this story stayed in your heart the most. On a warm afternoon, much like the one it all began, Mara stood by the cafe window, sunlight pouring over her face, no longer afraid of the world. Gregory sat quietly at a corner table, reading, calmer, softer, no longer defined only by wealth. Outside, bikes still rested under the bright sky, symbols not of fear but of loyalty. And in that simple, ordinary cafe, in the honest light of day, something extraordinary lived on quietly. The truth that no matter how broken a moment can be, kindness can still rise from it. And sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who choose compassion when they have every reason to choose anger.